The key to my daughter's new house felt like a block of ice in my palm. It was a cold, sharp-edged thing, a perfect mirror to the smile she gave me as she pressed it into my hand. "It's perfect, Mom, isn't it?" Clara said, her voice a little too bright, a little too loud in the cavernous, empty foyer. Marble floors gleamed under a chandelier that dripped crystals like frozen tears. This was the house my money had bought. My inheritance, the money my late husband Robert had worked his entire life to save for our old age, for my security. And here it was, turned into Italian marble and floor-to-ceiling windows for a man I barely trusted. My daughter's husband, Mark, slid his arm around her waist, his fingers splayed possessively across the silk of her dress. He had the kind of easy, polished charm that set my teeth on edge, the kind that salesmen use to sell you something you don't need. "We couldn't have done it without you, Eleanor," he said, his voice smooth as honey poured over gravel. But his eyes, when they met mine, were cold and flat as a winter lake. They held a glint of triumph, sharp and cruel. It was a look that said, "I won." A tremor of pure, undiluted hatred ran through me, so strong it made me dizzy. I had to grip the newel post at the bottom of the sweeping staircase just to stay upright. The wood was slick and foreign beneath my trembling fingers, lacquered to a high shine that reflected a distorted, frail version of me. This wasn't just a house. It was a tombstone for the life I was supposed to have. And they had dragged me here to witness its unveiling. In the corner, almost swallowed by the shadows of the grand entryway, stood my granddaughter, Lily. At 16, she was a quiet, watchful creature, all sharp angles and oversized sweaters that seemed to be her armor against the world. While her parents preened in the cold, ostentatious light, Lily's gaze was fixed on me. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She just watched me with her dark, serious eyes, the same eyes my Robert had. Eyes that saw too much and said too little. In that moment, looking at her solemn face, I felt the first crack in my despair. It was the faintest whisper of a question, a thought so wild I almost dismissed it. She knew. She knew this was all wrong, and that small, silent acknowledgement from my quiet granddaughter was the only thing that kept me from screaming. It was the beginning of a promise that this was not the end of the story. The day I found out the money was gone felt like the end of the world. It was a Tuesday. I remember that because the gardeners were supposed to come, and I was sitting at my little kitchen desk, the one Robert had built for me from warm, scarred oak, trying to pay them online. The screen flashed red, insufficient funds. I blinked, confused. The words didn't compute. They were alien, belonging to someone else's life, someone else's mistakes. That was impossible. I typed in the password again, my fingers fumbling on the keys, my own name and Robert's birthday feeling like a betrayal. Insufficient funds. The phrase echoed in the quiet house, my house, the one I'd lived in for 40 years. It was a sturdy, comfortable home, filled with the ghosts of laughter and the scent of my prize-winning rose bushes. It was all I had left of Robert. I called the bank, my heart thumping a nervous, unsteady rhythm against my ribs. A polite young man put me on hold, the tinny music grating on my nerves, each note a tiny drill boring into my skull. When he came back, his voice was careful, hesitant, the practiced tone of someone about to deliver devastating news. "Ma'am, it seems the joint account was closed 2 weeks ago." The entire balance was transferred to a new account. "Joint account?" I asked. My voice thin and reedy, a stranger's voice. "What joint account?" "The one you share with your daughter, Clara Jennings." The phone slipped from my hand, clattering onto the worn linoleum floor. I hadn't opened a joint account with Clara. I would never. My finances were mine, a fierce point of independence I'd clung to since Robert's passing. The blood drained from my face as the pieces began to slam into place with brutal, sickening clarity. Clara's visits over the past few months, suddenly more frequent, more solicitous. Her casual questions about my passwords disguised as helpful attempts to get me up to speed with technology. Her insistence on taking me to a new bank, a friend of Mark's who could offer me better rates, a man with a smile as slick as Mark's. The papers I'd signed, my vision blurred by grief and a foolish, bottomless trust, believing her when she said they were just standard updates for the estate. I had walked willingly into her trap. She had used my love for her as the bait. When I confronted her, she didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. We met at a sterile, chic coffee shop she'd chosen, a place with white walls and uncomfortable metal chairs that felt as cold as her heart. She stirred her latte, the tiny spoon clinking a maddening, incessant rhythm against the porcelain. "Mom, you have to understand," she began, her gaze fixed on the swirling foam as if the answers were written there. "Mark had this incredible business opportunity. A once-in-a-lifetime chance. We needed capital." "You needed my capital?" I whispered, the words like shards of glass in my throat. "Clara, that was everything. That was for my home, my care. That was your father's legacy. And now it's our legacy," she said, finally looking up. Her eyes were hard, opaque. The soft, loving daughter I'd raised was gone, replaced by this cold stranger wearing her face. "Mark is going to double it. Triple it. You'll get it all back, and then some. You just have to be patient. We bought the house as an investment." "An investment?" I choked out a laugh that sounded more like a sob. It echoed strangely in the hip, minimalist space. "You stole my life savings to buy a mansion, and you're calling it an investment? You're being dramatic," she snapped, her voice sharp as a shard of broken glass. "We've set you up in a lovely apartment. It's much more manageable for a woman your age. You should be thanking us." The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it stole my breath. Thanking them. She had ripped the very foundation of my life out from under me and expected gratitude. I looked at my daughter, at her expensive handbag and her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently on the table, and I saw Mark's reflection in her eyes. He had done this. He had twisted her, molded her into this greedy, heartless version of herself. But she had let him. She had held the pen. She had signed my life away. That day, in that cold white coffee shop, I lost more than my money. I lost my daughter. The apartment was exactly what she called it, manageable. A single, damning word that meant small, sterile, and soulless. It was in a sprawling complex on the other side of town, a place with endless beige walls and the faint, antiseptic smell of industrial cleaner that never quite faded. My furniture, the heavy, dark wood pieces Robert and I had collected over a lifetime, looked monstrous and out of place in the cramped rooms like caged lions. The movers, hired by Mark, had handled them with careless haste, nicking the leg of my favorite armchair and leaving a long, white scratch across the top of the dining table where my family had shared thousands of meals. Each scratch felt like a personal wound, a deliberate desecration of my memories. I spent the first few weeks in a thick fog of grief and rage. I'd sit for hours on my sofa, the one that now took up half the living room, and stare at the blank wall opposite. The silence was the worst part. My old house had been filled with the comfortable groans and creaks of a place that had lived a long life alongside me. This apartment was silent, its newness a constant, screaming reminder of everything I had lost. Clara called once a week, her voice strained with a false cheerfulness that was more insulting than silence. "How are you settling in, Mom? Are you loving how easy it is to clean?" She never asked if I was happy. She never apologized. We were playing a grotesque game, pretending our family hadn't been shattered into a million pieces. I would give one-word answers, my voice flat and dead, until she would sigh with theatrical frustration and make an excuse to hang up. It was Lily who started visiting. She'd appear at my door on Saturday afternoons, a book tucked under her arm. She never knocked, just used the key Clara had given her, an act of quiet defiance. She would let herself in and find me sitting in the gloom. She wouldn't say much at first. She'd just sit in the armchair opposite me, the one with the nicked leg, and read. Her quiet presence was a strange comfort. It was a thread, however thin, to the world I used to know, a world where I was still a grandmother, not just a victim. One afternoon, about a month into my new, diminished life, she looked up from her book. "Grandma," she said, her voice soft but clear in the silent room. "Did you know Dad's new company is called R.E. Holdings?" I shook my head, not really caring. It was just another detail in the grand architecture of their betrayal. "The R is for Robert," she continued, her eyes fixed on my face, watching for my reaction. "And the E is for Eleanor." I froze. A cold dread, thick and suffocating, washed over me. They had not only taken my money. They had taken our names. They had plastered them on the front of their stolen enterprise, a monument to their deceit. It was a level of cruelty so profound, so personal, it felt like they had reached back in time and desecrated my marriage, my very identity. I stared at Lily, and for the first time, I saw more than just quiet sympathy in her eyes. I saw a flicker of anger, a shared anger. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't entirely alone in my grief. The quiet girl in the chair wasn't just my granddaughter. She was my ally. That revelation about the company name became a crack of light in my dark room. It was a sign that I wasn't just imagining the malice behind their actions. It was calculated. It was personal. And Lily had been the one to show me. After that day, our Saturday afternoons changed. They were still quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was the quiet of co-conspirators. I started talking. At first, it was just a trickle of memories, stories about her grandfather, about the house, about how we saved. I told her how Robert would put a little bit of every paycheck into a special account, an account he called the Someday Fund. He'd draw little pictures in the passbook of a cottage by a lake, a place we dreamed of retiring to. The dream died with him, but the money remained, a testament to his love and foresight. It was my safety net. Lily listened, her chin resting on her hand, her dark eyes never leaving my face. She absorbed every word. She didn't offer advice or platitudes. She just listened. And then she started asking questions. Not about the money, not directly. Her questions were small, sharp, and precise like a surgeon's tools. Did Mom ever talk about that summer she worked at the law firm before she met Dad? She asked one day, seemingly out of the blue as she idly flipped a page. I had to think back, digging through decades of memories. Oh, ages ago. Yes, she was a paralegal intern for a few months. She hated it. Said it was all paperwork and secrets. Why do you ask? Lily just nodded, her expression unreadable. Just curious. She was filing the information away. Another time, while I was complaining about Mark's smug smile, she asked, "Does Dad still have that old laptop? The silver one he used to use before he got his new one for the company?" I have no idea, honey. It's probably in a box in their garage. Why? No reason, she said, turning a page in her book. But I saw her fingers tighten on the paper just for a second. I began to realize that Lily was not just a passive listener. She was gathering string. Each question, each seemingly random memory she prompted was another piece of a puzzle I couldn't see. What she was building, I didn't know. But for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. It was a dangerous, fragile thing, but it was there. My quiet granddaughter was weaving something in the shadows, and I had a feeling it was a net. My flashbacks became more vivid, colored by my new, bitter knowledge. I remembered the first time Clara brought Mark home. He'd arrived with a bottle of expensive wine and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Robert had been polite but wary. Later that night, after they'd left, Robert sat in his armchair, swirling the last of the wine in his glass. "There's something off about him, Elle," he'd said, his brow furrowed. "He's too smooth. Like a polished stone. Nothing to grab onto." At the time, I dismissed it as my husband being overprotective. "Oh, Robert, give the man a chance. Clara's happy. Happiness isn't the only thing that matters," he'd murmured, staring into the fire. "Character matters." How those words haunted me now, echoing in the sterile silence of my beige box. I remembered a conversation with Clara a year or so before Robert passed away. We were in my garden, pulling weeds under the warm sun. She'd been complaining about their finances, about how they were struggling to keep up with their friends. "It's just so hard. Mom," she'd sighed, yanking a stubborn dandelion from the soil with a vicious tug. "Mark has all these big ideas, but we never have enough to get them started. If only we had a little nest egg, like you and Dad." I had felt a pang of sympathy for her then. Now, the memory made me sick. The seed had been planted long ago. She had been looking at my life savings not as my security, but as her opportunity. And Mark had been there, watering that seed, nurturing the greed until it choked out everything else. The tension in the present grew. I had to sell my car, an old but reliable sedan Robert had meticulously maintained. I couldn't afford the insurance and gas on my meager Social Security check. Now I was truly trapped in the beige apartment, dependent on Lily for my weekly escape and for groceries. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest day and night. One Saturday, Lily arrived looking paler than usual. She set the grocery bags on the counter and came to sit with me, foregoing her usual ritual of opening her book. Mom and Dad had a fight last night, she said, her voice barely a whisper. A bad one. I waited, my body rigid. It was about the company. Mom was crying, she said. She said she never wanted any of this. My heart, which I thought had hardened into a solid lump of resentment, gave a painful lurch. What did she mean, Lily? Dad was yelling. He told her she didn't have a choice. He said she owed him. He said he was the only one who ever cleaned up her messes. Lily looked at me, her young face etched with a worry that was far too old for her years. Grandma, what mess? The question hung in the air between us, heavy and ominous. A mess. A secret big enough that Mark could use it as a weapon against his own wife. A secret that would make my daughter betray her own mother. The story was changing shape again. It wasn't just about greed anymore. It was about something deeper, something darker. It was about a past I knew nothing about. My daughter wasn't just a thief. She was a hostage. And the inheritance wasn't just funding a lavish lifestyle. It was ransom money. Subscribe now, you won't believe the twist that's coming. The idea that Clara was being controlled, not just manipulated, shifted my entire world on its axis. My anger, which had been a roaring fire, banked into a low, smoldering ember of dread. What could she have done? What secret was so terrible that it was worth my entire future? My mind raced through Clara's life, searching for a shadow, a dark corner I had missed. She had always been a good girl, if a little impulsive. A rule follower. I couldn't imagine what kind of mess Mark could be holding over her head. My weekly phone calls with Clara took on a new, painful dimension. I listened past the false brightness in her voice, searching for the fear underneath. I heard it in the slight tremor when she mentioned Mark's name, in the way she quickly changed the subject if I asked how the business was really doing. She was a prisoner in her marble-floored cage. My heart ached for her, an emotion so conflicting and confusing it left me breathless. How could I feel pity for the person who had destroyed me? But I did. She was still my daughter. Lily became my eyes and ears. She moved through her parents' grand, unhappy house like a ghost, gathering information in whispers and fragments. She told me about the locked office Mark kept, the one even Clara wasn't allowed into. She mentioned hushed, angry phone calls he'd take late at night in the garden, his voice a low, menacing growl. She told me how he'd started drinking more, his polished charm fraying at the edges after dark, revealing a raw, angry core. One afternoon, Lily came to my apartment with a small, rectangular object clutched in her hand. It was an old, silver external hard drive, its metal casing cool to the touch. It was in a box of old electronics in the garage, just like you thought, she said, placing it on the coffee table between us. It landed with a soft, metallic thud that sounded unnaturally loud in the silent room. It's his. The old one he used before the company. My hands trembled as I picked it up. It felt heavy, dense with secrets. What are we supposed to do with this, Lily? I don't even have a computer anymore. My old desktop had been sold along with most of my other possessions in a hasty estate sale Mark had arranged. An event he'd called streamlining my assets. I know, she said calmly. We can take it to the library. The following Saturday, we sat huddled together at a public computer terminal, the fluorescent lights of the library humming above us. I felt like a spy in a foreign country, my heart hammering against my ribs. Lily, completely at ease in the digital world, plugged the drive into the USB port. A list of folders appeared on the screen. Most were blandly labeled: finances, contacts, projects. Let's try this one, Lily murmured, her finger hovering over a folder named Archives. She clicked it. Inside were more folders, each labeled with a year. My breath caught in my throat. This was a timeline of his life with my daughter. Which year, Grandma? Lily asked softly. I don't know, I whispered. The year before they got married. The year she worked at that law firm. Lily navigated to the correct folder. It was mostly empty, just a few stray documents with boring names. I felt a wave of disappointment. We were chasing ghosts. Then Lily's sharp eyes caught something I had missed. A single, oddly named audio file tucked away in a subfolder labeled Insurance. The file was named Sin. Confession. Wave. My blood ran cold. C for Clara. Lily, I said, my voice hoarse. Click on it. She looked at me, her expression grave. She slid a pair of cheap library headphones over my ears, the plastic cool against my skin, and pressed play. The first thing I heard was the sound of a woman weeping. A desperate, broken sound that I recognized instantly. It was Clara, but she sounded so young, so terrified. Then I heard Mark's voice, smooth and chillingly calm. Just tell me again, from the beginning. Tell me everything you did. For the recording. And then my daughter's voice, ragged with tears, began to speak. She confessed. She confessed to something that happened that summer she worked at the law firm. She had been tasked with shredding old case files. In one file, for a major corporate client, she found evidence of massive financial fraud, internal memos detailing a cover-up. The partner she worked for, a senior man at the firm, found out she'd seen it. He threatened her, told her he'd ruin her, make sure she never worked in any professional capacity again. He scared her, so she did something stupid. Desperate, she took the file. She wasn't going to do anything with it. She just panicked, thinking it was her only protection. But then she lost it. She left it on a bus or in a coffee shop. She wasn't sure. The firm went into crisis mode, convinced there was a leak. They fired her, but the file never surfaced. The secret was safe. Except it wasn't. As her story tumbled out, the truth became sickeningly clear. She had confessed her terrified secret not to a priest or a friend, but to her new boyfriend, a charming, sympathetic man named Mark. He had been her shoulder to cry on. He had comforted her, told her it would all be okay. And he had recorded her. He had kept her secret on a hard drive labeled insurance. He hadn't lost the file. He was the one who found it. He had likely been tracking her. Knowing the firm and its vulnerabilities, Clara hadn't just stumbled into his life. He had targeted her. Her stupid, youthful mistake had become the chain he'd wrapped around her for 2 decades. The audio file was his leverage. The mess he was always cleaning up was the one he himself had curated and held over her head every step of their life together. Every financial decision, every isolation from me and her old friends. It had all been orchestrated by him to keep her under his thumb. The inheritance wasn't just about funding his ambition. It was the ultimate price of her silence. He had convinced her that if his business was a success, if he was powerful enough, the old secret wouldn't matter. It was a lie. Another layer of her cage. I ripped the headphones off. A strangled gasp escaping my lips. The librarian at the main desk looked over and shushed us with a severe frown. I didn't care. I was looking at my granddaughter, whose face was a mask of cold, hard fury. She had known, she had suspected something like this all along. Her quietness wasn't shyness. It was observation. Her questions weren't random. They were a targeted investigation. This brilliant, brave girl had been solving a crime I didn't even know had been committed. Lily, I breathed, my heart a wild drum against my ribs. What do we do? She reached out and calmly clicked a button on the screen. Copy. Then she opened up an anonymous email client. She began to type. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with a certainty that amazed me. She wasn't just ruining them. She was liberating them, and the crash was going to be spectacular. Lily's plan was simple, elegant, and utterly devastating. She attached the audio file, along with several other documents she'd found on the hard drive, emails from Mark to an old associate from that same law firm, discussing the leverage he had. To an email, the recipient list was a work of art. It included the managing partners of the law firm Clara had worked for, the board of directors for Mark's new company, several key financial journalists Lily had looked up, and for good measure, the entire parent-teacher association email list for her high school. She typed a single sentence in the body of the email. A secret is only powerful when it's kept. Her finger hovered over the send button. She looked at me, her dark eyes asking a final question. Are you ready? I thought of my house, my money, my lost years of peace. I thought of my daughter, living in a gilded cage, tormented by a youthful mistake. I thought of Mark, his smug smile, his stolen life. I thought of Robert and the promise I'd made to him to live my life fully, not as a victim. I reached out and placed my hand over Lily's. Together, we pushed the mouse, and with a soft click, the world exploded. We didn't have to wait long. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. By Monday morning, Mark's world was a raging inferno. The law firm, faced with public evidence of a decades-old cover-up and the potential for a massive lawsuit, immediately distanced themselves from him and launched an internal investigation that was, of course, leaked to the press. His board of directors at RE Holdings called an emergency meeting and summarily fired him, citing the morals clause in his contract. The company, built on my stolen money and my name, began to crumble. But the most spectacular explosion happened at home. Clara called me on Tuesday. Her voice a sound I had never heard before, a strange mix of terror and an almost giddy, weightless freedom. "He's gone, Mom," she said, her words tumbling over each other. "He just packed a bag and left. The locks are changed. A lawyer called me. The firm. They know everything. They think I leaked it. They're calling me a whistleblower." She let out a laugh that was half a sob. "Me? After all these years of being terrified, they think I'm brave." "Are you okay?" I asked, my own voice thick with emotion. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "No," she said honestly. "But I think I will be." "Mom, I am so sorry. I know that word isn't enough. I know it will never be enough." "I know, honey," I said, and for the first time, I meant it. The anger was gone, washed away by the terrible, cleansing truth. "I know." The climax, however, was not on the phone. It was in person. A week later, Clara asked me to come to the house. The grand, marble-floored house that had been the symbol of my betrayal. When I walked in, it felt different. The oppressive, triumphant energy was gone. In its place was a quiet, fragile emptiness. Clara was standing in the middle of the cavernous living room. She looked smaller, her expensive clothes hanging on her as if they belonged to someone else. Lily stood a few feet away, her hands in her pockets, watching us both. "I've put the house on the market," Clara said, her voice steady. "The company is being liquidated. After all the legal fees and the debts, there won't be much left. Certainly not what I took from you. I don't know if I can ever pay you back, not really." She took a deep breath, and her composure finally broke. Tears streamed down her face, real tears, not the crocodile tears of a manipulator, but the heartbroken tears of a daughter who knows she has done a terrible thing. "I was so scared," she wept, her body shaking. "From the very beginning, he had me. I thought I was protecting myself, protecting the life I'd built. I told myself you were strong, that you'd be okay. I let myself believe the lies because the truth was too ugly. I let him turn me into a monster because I was too much of a coward to face what he would do if I said no." She sank onto the edge of an ornate sofa, her head in her hands. "I stole your life, Mom. For him, and now he's gone, and all I have is the wreckage." That was my collapse moment. Seeing my daughter so utterly broken, stripped of all her defenses, I didn't feel victory. I felt a profound, gut-wrenching sorrow for all of us. For the years we had lost. For the trust that had been corroded by a secret. For the woman my daughter could have been if not for one mistake and one predatory man. I walked over to her and sat down. I looked at Lily, who gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. My quiet, brilliant granddaughter had not only ruined the man who had destroyed our family, but she had also given us this. A moment of raw, painful truth. A chance to start again. I reached out and took my daughter's hand. It was cold and trembling. "We'll figure it out, Clara," I said softly. "The money doesn't matter. It never really did. We'll figure it out. Together." The months that followed were not easy. They were a slow, painful process of rebuilding from the rubble. The big house sold for less than they'd paid, the market having cooled and the scandal surrounding Mark's name tainting the property. After paying off the mountain of debt he had accrued, there was very little left. Clara didn't try to keep any of it. She signed the remaining balance over to me without a second thought. It wasn't my inheritance, not even clothes, but it was a start. It was an apology in the only language she had left. She and Lily moved into a small, rented townhouse not far from my own beige apartment. The fancy clothes and expensive dinners were gone. Clara got a job as a receptionist at a local doctor's office. It was humble, quiet work. She came home tired every day, but I saw a light in her eyes that had been extinguished for years. The fear was gone. She was her own person again. Our relationship was not magically healed. Trust, once shattered, is a mosaic put back together with glue and patience. You can still see the cracks. There were days of awkward silence, of conversations that skirted around the giant, gaping wound of the past. But there were also good days. We started having Sunday dinners again, not at a grand dining table, but squeezed into my little apartment kitchenette. We'd cook together, Clara and I, bumping elbows in the small space. Lily would sit at the table, doing her homework, occasionally chiming in with a dry, witty comment that would make us both laugh. The laughter was hesitant at first, but it grew stronger each week. One afternoon, Lily and I were sitting in my living room, back in our familiar Saturday spots. She was reading, and I was looking out the window at the manicured lawn of the apartment complex. "You know," I said, my voice thoughtful. "You never told me how you knew. How you suspected something was so wrong with your father." She marked her page with her finger and looked up at me. "He never looked at Mom like she was his wife," she said simply. "He looked at her like she was an asset, something he owned. And he looked at your money the same way." She paused, her gaze direct and full of a wisdom that belied her age. "Grandpa Robert looked at you like you were the whole world." I remembered that. I knew what love was supposed to look like, and what they had. It wasn't love. It was a transaction. I just had to find the receipt. Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. In her simple, profound statement, she had summed up everything. The quiet girl hadn't just been observing. She had been remembering. She had been carrying the legacy of her grandfather's love, using it as a yardstick to measure the world. It was Robert's character, the very thing he had warned me about all those years ago, that had lived on in his granddaughter and, in the end, saved us all. My inheritance was gone. My old house was just a memory. But as I sat there in my small, beige apartment with my brave granddaughter across from me and the promise of Sunday dinner with my healing daughter, I realized I hadn't been left with nothing. I had been given a second chance. The money had been a safety net, but it had also been a target. Without it, we had nothing left to lose and everything to rebuild. We were rebuilding it not on a foundation of finances, but on the hard-won, cracked, and infinitely more precious ground of truth. And that was an inheritance of a different kind, one that no one could ever steal. Comment which part of the story left you speechless.